This is A View from the Bunker. Now, here's Derek Gilbert.
Was an advanced civilization here on Earth suddenly wiped out by a global cataclysm about 12,000 years ago? And did survivors from this civilization then spread the memories of its amazing technology to other survivors, primitive hunter-gatherers around the world, resulting in the megalithic structures we have trouble explaining even today? Welcome to A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. Joining us this month for our Iron and Myth Roundtable as we discuss the hit Netflix series Ancient Apocalypse, presented by Graham Hancock. We bring you our friendly neighborhood PhD, the founder and senior fellow of the Institute of Biblical Anthropology, Dr. Judd Burton, best-selling author, award-winning screenwriter Brian Godawa, and the pastor of the Reformed Baptist Church of Northern Colorado in Boulder, author of the 10th Anniversary Revised Expanded Edition of Giants, Sons of the Gods, Pastor Doug Van Dorn. Well, fellas, The Guardian newspaper in the UK ran a review of this last fall, and they referred to it as the most dangerous show on Netflix. Brian, you've got some connections to the entertainment world in Hollywood.
Not anymore.
You did. At least you've seen the inside of that beast. Is that a fair description? I mean, you had critics, take aim at your work. What do you think?
Yeah, I had the whole left, everyone, including The Guardian and all of them, Slate, Vox, they all attacked my son Hunter.
Yeah.
Which was a badge of honor to me that, so I guess in some ways, maybe Graham would consider that a badge of honor as well, to be accused of that. But of course, that does play into his martyr complex, which is part of the problem of the whole show. But whatever they're saying, it's just for news, selling, clicks and stuff like that. I mean, obviously Netflix has it on. What's far more controversial would be Chris Rock. So,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Right? I just saw that.
But I think what's behind that is the, it's ironically where we're going to be talking about this show, Ancient Apocalypse, and it's being attacked because basically it's being accused of being racist. The theory of Graham Hancock is that, sometime around the end of the Ice Age, there's cataclysms that wiped out advanced civilizations on Earth. And then a few of those survivors went and gave new, wisdom and technology to help rebuild human societies after that. So around, 10,000 BC. And so, and his argument is that, as we'll talk about today on the show, that so many of these, architecture, formations and stuff they didn't have enough intelligence to be able to build these things. And so therefore it must have come from a more wiser race. Of course, he doesn't say that, but that's what these, modern, postmodern wackos are saying. And ironically, I mean, there's many other problems and issues, but again, it's like, well, if it's true, it's not about race anyway. And what's the big deal, But everything has to be reduced to race now. So if you ever criticize an culture that is non-white in any capacity, you're considered racist, So, what
so
do
these
you do?
megalithic structures in places like Egypt and Turkey that go back 10,000 years when we were supposed to be just Neolithic hunters living in mud huts had to be, if you dare question that it was the indigenous population, then somehow it's racist. Even though when you look historically, that the indigenous population of Turkey are not the people who are living in Turkey today.
Yeah, it really is.
I mean, the Seljuk Turks came in, 11th, 12th century and sort of, wiped out the people who'd been there before that. It's, you could example after example. Anyway, Doug, what was your takeaway? Just some initial reaction to the series.
Well, I mean, I found Graham 25 years ago when that book first came out, The Fingerprints of the Gods. And I just, in some ways, that was a very pivotal book for me to read with all the stuff that I've done since. Very helpful. And as I pretty much read everything that he wrote after that. I didn't read his book on the shaman, whatever, taking the ayahuasca. But other than that, pretty much, I've read most of it. And so I was looking forward to the show, and I thought it was incredibly well done. It's typical Graham Hancock. It was actually a little more chill than what he has been on like some recent Coast to Coast shows, where just kind of the angry Graham Hancock didn't come out too much in this. So I thought,
oh, really?
Yeah.
Angry? Why? Or
well, I have my own suspicions about it. I think that his personality changed once he started doing ayahuasca. And I wonder if that might not be related to some of the stuff that we've talked about in other episodes.
Okay.
Yeah. So I still really like the main paradigm that he's coming from. And there's obviously things that I'm going to disagree with it. I think we all will. I don't know what you guys think about this, but there was the moment when he's at the Ohio Serpent Mound, and he like spends 5 minutes telling people about how evil it is that they won't let him go in and film. I actually thought that was brilliant for him to put that in there. Oh yeah, you're not gonna let me film. I'm gonna tell 100 million people what you just did.
Yeah. The
revenge.
The guys running the site would have been better off to just let him in, because as it was, exactly. they wound up flying drones over the Serpent Mound anyway.
I know.
So it's not like he missed anything.
Property. Yep.
Right. So, well, Judd, as an archaeologist yourself, an historian whose views on the history of the world don't exactly track with the consensus of academia, what did you think of Ancient Apocalypse?
I thought it was well done. I discovered Graham Hancock probably right after Fingerprints of the Gods came out, about 1995. And it was really kind of a revelation for me. I thought that he was asking the right questions. At the time, I was a historian in training, so it certainly wasn't in line with the academic sort of take on prehistory. But the questions were compelling, and over the next couple of decades, as I myself acquired the skill set, not just in the field, but also the theoretical skill set, I watched closely what was happening in prehistoric archaeology, late prehistoric archaeology. And it was just amazing how all these sort of tumblers, like in a lock, were falling into place that would seem to corroborate at least some of what Hancock was asking. And I thought that the series was really well done. I thought that it put forward and synopsized those questions quite well, and sort of integrated some newer finds that helped to corroborate that narrative. But again, as with you guys, my big critique is the agency that he ascribes to these culture builders in late prehistory.
So in a nutshell, just so people understand, if they've not seen the series, what we're talking about, Hancock, through the course of these 8 episodes of this series, which is done very well for Netflix, he argues that at the end of the Ice Age, around 9600 BC, survivors of a lost civilization, a civilization that was destroyed during the Ice Age, traveled to other areas around the world and brought with them forgotten knowledge. And he talks about a number of culture heroes that showed up, Göbekli Tepe, South America, Easter Island, Mesoamerica, a location in Indonesia that I hadn't been familiar with called Gunung Padang. I'm probably mispronouncing it, and basically shared building techniques with these presumably primitive civilizations that they did not develop themselves, and showed them how to build in ways that would be difficult to replicate today, and build in alignment with certain astronomical phenomena, solstices, equinoxes, the rising and setting of Sirius, the lunar cycles, and so forth. And so his premise then is that the civilizations in those locations could not have developed these techniques and learned this knowledge themselves, somehow didn't have it before the Ice Age, and had to be taught this by the remnants of this civilization. And so therefore, he's trying to find what this civilization is that taught these people this lost or forgotten knowledge, and seems to be hinting that there's something at work here that mainstream science and archaeology wants to cover up. And I think that's the angry Graham Hancock that you were alluding to, Doug, that he feels that his work is unfairly belittled because he's asking questions that are outside the box. Is that a fair synopsis of the series?
I think so. I might just soften it just a little. Well, to go back to what you just said about the angry Graham Hancock, at the very beginning, he says, I'm trying to overthrow the paradigm of history. Like, that's what you're trying to do. So what else do you think that these guys are going to do?
Yeah.
You're directly attacking them, and you come out and you say that that's what you're going to do. You know, I think to his point, he's trying to argue that all these archaeologists are saying that all there were at this time were hunter-gatherers. And we don't have any evidence that they were doing anything other than that. And then all of a sudden, and you hear this with other people, you know, with Pyramid of Giza, stuff like that, you have this insanely amazing technology, some of which we can't even duplicate today, just arising seemingly out of nowhere. And then everything after that seems to degenerate rather than get better. And I actually do think that there's something compelling about the basic argument there.
Now, he doesn't support the ancient aliens stuff, does he?
No, I think he more supports kind of the ayahuasca thing, where actually we've been contacted by spiritual beings or something like that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think that there's something that's definitely connected between his ancient civilization and his reasons for going to the other world on taking drug trips.
Interesting. None of that comes out in the show, of course. It's more.
No, that does not come out.
I was just curious.
That's one of the reasons Sharon and I spent a lot of time this weekend watching programs on Gaia TV, which for you at home, I do not recommend unless you're, ready to, just start yelling at your television set. No, that's not what that means. That kind of thing. We find that entertaining. It's sort of like our version of Mystery Science Theater 3000. Hancock was on a number of those programs where he was, he wasn't, he was alongside people like David Wilcox or Corey Goode, others who do argue for an ancient astronaut sort of thing. Freddie Silva is another that we and we watched several of Freddie Silva's documentaries on Saturday, and it as with the UFO phenomenon in general, it veers into the paranormal, the metaphysical. The aliens aren't just here from another planet. They were the gods of the ancient world. It's very Zechariah Sitchin, basically. It's Sitchinism.
Velikovsky before him, right? The whole worlds in collision and all that kind of stuff, which had to do with some kind of cataclysm out of which, mankind arose or whatever.
And I think you can go into a cataclysmist direction without bringing in, the ancient aliens. There is some evidence that there are things in the solar system that are not quite as we've been taught. In fact, we had a really interesting discussion with one of the archaeologists working at the site of ancient Sodom now, Tal El Hammam, about a near pass by the planet Mars around 700 BC. Like, oh, okay. I know Steve Quayle wrote a book about that, or at least republished a book about that. But this is a serious archaeologist who has a peer-reviewed paper about the destruction of Sodom.
Wow.
Who's taking that seriously. So, we can go in that direction, but I guess it comes back to your point, Brian, agency. Who's responsible for teaching this knowledge that what must have been lost, and where did they come from?
Yeah, I wanted to point out something here that struck me. Every time he talked about, and he does this near the end of almost every episode, he'll give one of the myths of the local places that he visited and how it relates to the flood and the knowledge that came through whoever it was. But I thought it was interesting because every time he talks about it, first of all, there's the flood, and then there's the teacher who comes after the flood,
right,
to get the knowledge. Well, that's exactly backwards than you find it in a book like Enoch, where you have the same idea that the watchers are teaching the knowledge, but they do it before the flood, and then God wipes us out because of that. So completely reverses the script. I don't know what you guys, if you have any thoughts.
Well, Judd, let you weigh in on this, because you and Aaron Judkins have been doing work on this as regards Göbekli Tepe, which was featured in the fifth episode of this Ancient Apocalypse series. He goes to Göbekli Tepe, and like a number of the other structures here, as Doug said, he dates the construction to about 9600 BC, which is immediately following what they believe to be the flood of the Younger Dryas. Judd, how do you put the timing of the construction of Göbekli Tepe versus the Younger Dryas?
Well, that there was a presence there before, I think, is attested in the archaeological record, but the main complexes, the really rock star stuff that people see in the popular media, lines up with the timeline that you just said. At any rate, what's clear about the Younger Dryas is that, yeah, there was worldwide flooding. It was lots of localized flooding, but it was around the world. And so that event, I don't think there should be any debate about it at this point, that it was so widespread that it seared itself into our cultural memories, so that you've got people interpreting this event because they experienced it. There was an actual generation or generations of people that actually experienced it. And so the timing is interesting, but the phase of Göbekli Tepe, if we're to put any weight to Klaus Schmidt's work, and I think that we have good reason to in terms of the timeline, I think that it behooves us to look at that there was a phase slightly before going into the Younger Dryas events. And if that's the case, then speaking to what Doug pointed out, that holds true with this narrative and timeline about these fallen celestial influences on human society happening before that flood, and then the flood actually being the punishment, the punitive measure against this knowledge, which was not intended to be passed along as it was. But I think the strength of Hancock's work in regard to sites like Göbekli Tepe and this general timeline, pre-flood, post-flood timeline, are the questions themselves. If we set aside, his martyr complex and all of that stuff that surrounds him, I think that the questions are important, and they help move us towards the structure of this timeline, because when you take into account other sites that are roughly contemporary with it, like Natufi and Jericho in Israel or Tel Carmel in Syria, those are sites that have even more archaeological work done on them than Göbekli Tepe has, or even some of the more recent and chronologically older sites like Karahan Tepe. So it's not just some antediluvian quackery that's going on here. These are sites that are dated based on decades and decades and decades of archaeological.
So the dating is good, but we've also got some pre-9600 BC sites, Karahan Tepe being one of those. It's which is startling. It's just as spectacular and even older than Göbekli Tepe. From the standpoint then of...
can I say something,
Sure.
Derek, before we move on?
Yeah.
I want to say this because I wanted to address the big picture before we talk about details, because then it seems out of place. And that is, as a filmmaker, it was very well produced, beautiful, etc. And I don't begrudge the guy that he wants to put his money into telling his story, and it's expensive, and you want half-hour episodes, you got to keep them quick to keep people interested. All that stuff, I understand it all. Yet I do think we have to come at this understanding that this is pure propaganda. Now, the propaganda doesn't mean it's wrong or right. It's just it is exclusively only telling his story and not addressing anything else that doesn't fit the picture. And that's fine. I mean, for entertainment value, I enjoyed it. It's kind of cool. I'd like to read more on that. But the truth is, I was very dissatisfied because of the fact that there's so many things, especially I'm not very educated in archaeology and such. I have a curiosity, but I had to go and watch some other videos just to kind of see, well, what's he leaving out? And it's like, oh man, what he's leaving out is big. And I realized you can't cover everything, but to me, this is where I see that the propaganda, even if it supports my view, is just not satisfying, because you want to hear, well, not just, oh, they're trying to cover it up. Because a lot of these archaeologists, I've heard references like they're not trying to cover up. They're like, no, it's like, we would love to discover ancient civilization because then we would be famous and we'd be the biggest archaeologists of all, right? So I just kind of had that vibe as I'm watching it, that it's just like, he doesn't address anything contrary. And by the way, the purpose would be, here's the best argument. I would think a good filmmaker would say, here's the best argument against me, but then here's his objection and here's how I answer it. But he did none of that, just dismissals.
The funny thing is, you anticipated my question. I was going to actually ask you as a storyteller how you reviewed the way he presented his message, and because you're really good.
Horrible propaganda, And again, people need to know propaganda is not inherent. Like the gospel is propaganda. It can be, in some ways, right? You're trying to tell the story, and but I think even a good gospel presenter is going to address objections, right? So, and the other component. So I would recommend. I'll give you the link, Derek. I found actually there's this woman on YouTube, and her channel is called History with Kayla or Kaylee, and she's probably at about the same level. She's an amateur herself. I think she has some background in archaeology, but she's not like a hardcore archaeologist. She has to go do her own research too, but she's very into this. She has a whole channel on ancient archaeology and everything, right? And so she's doing a episode by episode critique of it, and I just found it very helpful. She's only up to episode 5, so she's still in the middle of going through it. She's going to go through the whole series. So we'll have the link for people just to see. And she's not, I don't know. She's just like a good, strong researcher herself. And she's not part of the establishment that she's trying to protect. And, there could be some of that sort of condescending mentality that we all know, the elitist mentality of the establishment that does actually go, well, you don't know what you're talking about because we're in power. I get that. And I believe that there's some of that going on, but just even this fact of all these archaeologists who are trying to cover it up because they're afraid of him. She's like, no, they're not. They do disagree. And of course they don't respect him, but it's like, they're not afraid or anything like that. So it's just helpful if you're going to watch the series, watch something that has an opposing view so you can sort of have a more balanced approach.
Brian, it makes me think about journalism in general, because he tells us at the beginning of the show that he's a journalist, right? I'm an investigative journalist. I'm not a scientist, whatever. Yeah. And then he says, it's my job to come to the truth. So,
Good point.
Watch the different. Look at the difference on a nightly news show and between an op-ed piece and what is supposed to be what is ideally supposed to be giving you just the news, just the facts from an objective point of view. Now, you kind of enter into what we're into today, which is really propagandized, state-controlled media. And it makes you wonder, how long ago was there a shift in the way that we were teaching journalism to people that maybe he doesn't even realize that's what he's doing? I don't know. Yeah, but I think it would be better for him to call what he's doing like an op-ed than it would be investigative journalism.
Yeah. No, very good point. I didn't even think of bringing that point up. Yeah. Get rid of that journalism. Just call yourself a filmmaker, a storyteller, a propagandist.
And people do this with like Fox News, right? They're like, well, Fox News is conservative. Well, it depends on what you mean. Are you talking about the opinion guys at night, like Tucker? Or are you talking about the news in the day? Totally different things.
Yeah.
So
that said, I still think the things he raises were, truly fascinating and interesting, and piqued my curiosity as well.
Yeah. Some of these sites I've not been familiar, like this one in Indonesia and Bimini Road I'd heard about, but wasn't really that familiar with. But that brought a question to my mind, Judd, because I know, again, as you mentioned, there are other archaeological sites out there that predate the flood, if we put the flood somewhere around that 9600 BC timeline, or that's like the emergence of the post-flood civilization, we know that there are civilizations and sites that pre-existed that, like Karahan Tepe and others. His premise is that some awesome, super advanced civilization that was just destroyed during the Ice Age was completely wiped off the map. And the only remnants of it are these post-flood sites. But we know that there are other sites that predate the flood. So why did their pre-flood, pre-Ice Age civilization get totally destroyed? Where are the remnants of that? I mean, it's not like the glaciers just kind of swept over one day, like in the movie, what was it, Day After Tomorrow?
Yeah.
Where all of a sudden the temperature drops to like 200 below zero in a matter of seconds. That didn't happen. It was a matter of centuries. So why didn't they move south? Why didn't they go to the Bahamas? Well, unless Velikovsky's right, and it could be, but again, what's the likelihood that this civilization that Hancock is trying to find just was completely destroyed except for a few survivors, even though we've got other sites from hunter-gatherer civilizations that existed prior to 9600. We've got those sites. Those somehow survived.
Isn't Jericho the oldest site?
Jericho is amongst the oldest. It's definitely 10th millennium BC. The watchtowers and the wall structures are, they all date to that period. And again, that's one of those sites like Kathleen Kenyon, literally wrote the book on that side, and she did excavate a phase of the prehistoric side. But yeah, the residual evidence of the presence of those societies, those civilizations, runs the gamut in the archaeological record. Of course, we have evidences for them. They weren't scoured completely off the face of the earth. I mean, if that were the case, then prehistoric archaeologists would be out of a job pretty much. It would just be it would be work for the paleontologists and the geologists.
Bingo.
But that's not the case. That's Hancock sort of builds his own snare and then steps into it with that sort of thing, not taking into account. I mean, he claims to take into account archaeological data, but it's this like selective cherry picking sort of way. And if he would just look at it, maybe not take ayahuasca and then consult with an archaeologist or something. I don't know. If he would just have a sober, no pun intended, or maybe the pun's intended, a sober discussion about this thing with actual experts in the field that have done prehistoric archaeology, you might have a better perspective. But I suspect that those conversations are not going to happen. But yeah, the residual evidence is just to, in summation, just to drive that point home, it does exist. So we're not talking about a complete scouring.
That's the thing that jumped out at me. That was the biggest complaint I have, not being an expert in pre-flood archaeology or anything. Just he spends a lot of time, for example, showing us some of the archaeological wonders and the construction techniques of the ancients. And for example, the Great Pyramid of Cholula, showing how this pyramid, the oldest level, dated to about 500 BC. So it's not really ancient. But when you look at places like Pumapunku and Sacsayhuaman in Peru, and the way those blocks fit together so precisely in a really geologically active area. And the point is made again and again that this construction is so much better than what the later Incas did. And yeah, you can see the difference. The Inca stonework is really primitive compared to what they built on top of. And yet you've got an area where you've got massive earthquakes regularly. This ancient architecture survives. So why is there nothing prior to 9600 BC? Was that all wiped out by the flood? And if so, how did this other stuff that pre-existed, from the hunter-gatherer civilizations survive, and not this stuff made by these guys who could build so great that for 10,000 years it survived all these massive earthquakes? It is a logical disconnect for me.
Well, those are questions that Hancock refuses to answer. I mean, it's not like there haven't been archaeologists and historians and specialists in a number of different fields that haven't asked him those kinds of questions, but he won't. It's the same, he defaults to the, well, you're hiding the truth and you're out to get me, and you've been corrupted by your whatever academic course you've taken in your study. He just defaults to this again and again. As much as valuable as I think the questions that he's asking are, that's one of his default modes.
Let's talk about the value. Doug, I know Sharon and I like the series. We enjoyed it. We've watched it twice through. What were some of the positive things, the good questions that came out of it for you?
I mean, it's Hancock's overall idea that I think Judd has just been talking about, that so few people were asking before he came along. He makes a point in there at some point. He goes, after I wrote Fingerprints of the Gods, I didn't really think there was anything else left to say. And then he, that was like in episode 2. And then he brings to light some of the new discoveries that have taken place just in the last 25 years. And I found those really interesting. The one you talked about in New Guinea, and obviously Göbekli Tepe wasn't around when he did that. He's written a book on that now, but to bring that to light on a TV show was pretty good. From what I remember, the 7th episode, that's where he goes into the Turkey caves, right?
Derinkuyu.
Yeah.
Derinkuyu, yeah. And super interesting, that whole place. And to tie that to megalithic world, I think that's really interesting, fascinating, especially when you consider the Nephilim part of it, which that's one of my frustrations. Here's a guy who's like, we got to take all these things so literally, and then all of a sudden giants come into the mythology, and he goes, there was never such a thing as giants. And he says this over and over and over. That's really weird. Why do you do that? Why are you so close to that, Graham? What's the problem? It's not even like it's only the Bible that tells that story. It's all these myths are telling the same story. I couldn't believe giants ever walked on the earth. And it just goes in another direction. I just think that's so strange.
I must have missed that part of that episode, because I was under the impression that the oldest section of Derinkuyu was built, maybe they started excavating around 2000 BC. Did he allude to an older phase of that underground city?
He was alluding, like in the other cases, he was referencing that perhaps they had come down and developed something that had pre-existed them or something.
Okay.
It was a similar speculation.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's mainstream archaeologists that put the maximum date at 2000 BC when it could be older, he suggests.
That is such a cool thing. I have to say, I have Derinkuyu in my novel Enoch Primordial that is available at Amazon. I brought that in, baby. Oh yeah. And I also brought in like Neanderthal, because of the fact that they're out of the sun, that creates a lot of the Neanderthal features and stuff. So yeah, I thought that was kind of cool.
I got to go back and reread that. I didn't know what Derinkuyu was then, but I know that we've got it on the proposed tour that Judd and Aaron Judkins are going to, go with us on to Göbekli Tepe and other places. So that's one of the sites. In fact, the one of the hotels is supposed to be in one of those underground caves in Cappadocia. But
wow.
Yeah. But we got to wait and see what's going on now with the infrastructure in Turkey. So that fall tour may be back into 2024 at some point.
Have you guys heard anything about Göbekli Tepe maybe having been affected by the earthquake? Somebody just told me that today.
Aaron Judkins got in touch and said that according to what he'd read, the tourism department there, the archaeology, whatever, the Turkish government said that it survived okay. I guess a couple of those big stone heads at Mount Nemrut fell over. But
I too found, I think the most, interesting, good part of it was, I am new to Graham Hancock. I mean, I know he's been around. I just have not read his stuff, so I was not familiar with what I always thought. Well, is he into that space alien thing? But I didn't realize, and the whole argument about the Ice Age and how it plays into our history and such. It's like that was really interesting to me, and that is definitely something I want to look more into in my own research, just out of curiosity.
Yeah,
the archaeological history of that impact of how that affected history and such. So that was really helpful. It was a good introduction for me to to that whole world.
One other one that I'll bring up, and Brian, when we did Paranormal, we did an episode on the Piri Reis map. I was like, well, the one episode I missed, and I think maybe that was Providence, but I don't know. Because I rather find the thing intriguing. I don't remember what you guys came to the conclusion of, but I know that there's whole sites out there that take to task what Hapgood did, and it's Graham Hancock who popularized that map in Fingerprints of the Gods. So when he actually brought that up in the show this time around, and then actually had somebody on there willing to say it's ridiculous that this is Antarctica, because everybody knows that it's South America, and the guy who just ran out of paper and he was writing a doodle. I was really glad they put that in, because it shows that at least Graham has, at least he knows that there's ideas out there that it's not Antarctica. Now, obviously, it's a propaganda show like you brought up, and they instantly just kind of said, well, it's very clearly Antarctica before the ice, sea level, and all that kind of stuff. But at least that he brought that up, and I thought that was good.
Yeah.
That was one of the things I found fascinating with that. They did a really good job with their CGI in showing how things would have looked when the water had receded. That episode, that was the fourth episode where they talked about Bimini Road and the Bahamas, and how this one big Bahama island off the coast of a much larger Florida existed when the water level was several hundred feet lower than it is today. And again, he's speculating that this might be connected to the destruction of Atlantis, again, around 9600 BC. Judd, again, based on your work there and the timeline at Göbekli Tepe, what's the timeline here? When was the flood, if we connect this to the Younger Dryas?
Well, I think, again, you're looking at that window of around 9500 BC at the end of the Pleistocene epoch, right, transitioning into the Holocene. That's the general time frame that we're looking at. I think that the Bimini episode was really interesting, because they really drove home that the sea levels were about 400 to 450 feet lower than they are. That's pretty considerable. And Bimini is certainly not the only underwater, proposed megalithic structure that we could be looking at, because there's a really interesting feature. Now, of course, Malta is known for its own, and Malta gets some coverage in the series. Malta is interesting for a number of reasons, not just megalithic structures that are on the island itself, but in the Straits of Malta, between Malta and Tunisia, underwater, there's an entire megalithic complex that divers and archaeologists have discovered, and it would have only been above sea level during the late Pleistocene era that's in question today. So there are other underwater structures, proposed monuments that exist that may even be better, at least from what I've seen about these megaliths off the coast of Malta, may be better case studies than some of the underwater structures that we find, or proposed underwater structures that we find around the world. But they're certainly there. We find residual evidence of settlements along the coast of the Black Sea, farther down, when the coast of that sea would have been above sea level during the late Pleistocene era. So that again that evidence of the pre-flood leading into the post-flood that you referenced a moment ago, Derek, is certainly there if people are willing to reference the material, the actual work that's been done. But again, and Hancock's not alone in this, but a lot of them cherry pick what they're looking at and don't look at data that contradicts, the hypothesis that they're trying to put forward.
I interviewed a while back a fellow by the name of Richard Burke, who wrote a series of historic fiction novels set in ancient Mesopotamia, prehistoric Mesopotamia, where Eridu was, the big city on the coast of the Persian Gulf, and the temple of Enki was sort of the center of the religious life of ancient Sumer. And of course, I found that really interesting. So we exchanged some emails and so forth. But he pointed me some academic research that the Persian Gulf, as we know it, was at one time actually the Persian Valley.
Yeah.
And that the Tigris and Euphrates come together at what was ancient Eridu and and then descended into a valley, which was a lush green valley fed by a number of other streams coming in from the Iranian side and the Arabian side, that just filled when the water levels rose around 9600 BC.
Wait. I'm having a hard time following this. Where were all the cars to create the pollution for the global warming to occur for all the waters to rise 400 meters?
That's the
Industrial Revolution.
Well, it was
That's it. Ancient civilization, Industrial Revolution caused it.
It must be.
That's it.
The fact is that the aurochs, which are, the giant cattle that used to roam Asia and Europe, the good thing is they never flatulated, because if they had, all of those, and the bison that roam North America, because we know, cattle today, beef cattle, we can't have those because...
I was about to get the aurochs. You take in all the other megafauna. There's your global warming and pre-flood, Brian.
That's what caused it. The massive flood was caused by gaseous...
It's dinosaur flatulence. That's what it is.
They got what they deserved.
We'll never live this down. This will get out. We'll never live it down.
Yeah, they'll take clips. See these nuts. Dinosaur flatulence. Humans walked with dinosaurs.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons why I get a little more serious. That I look at Hancock as like the enemy of my enemy. At some point, I think we'll get here into the kind of how opposed he is to Christianity, but. It's so many things that his work has done is just right in the face of the real evil that's in our culture right now. And you're just pointing out one of the most obvious ones, Brian, in bringing that up.
No, that's a very good point. Yeah. And also, despite what I said earlier in the beginning, have we not seen that all professional guilds and institutions become corrupt and protectors of their hegemonic power? And so I don't trust the archaeological establishment all that much either. I don't trust any of these establishments anymore, and especially as they become certainly more and more power hungry and willing to suppress. So there's some truth to that. I won't deny.
I think that's more of a risk in the medical industry, the public health industry, because there's so much money to be made there. Archaeology. Judd can attest to this. You're not going to get rich going into archaeology. So there's not as much money at stake there. And those guys will fight tooth and nail over their theories. What
about a guy here? Well, just a pushback. Not that it's everybody, it's probably hardly anybody, but what about a guy like Zahi Hawass down in Egypt? Is there no money to be made in hiding certain things down in Egypt for him as an individual?
Well, yeah, in an individual case, I suppose.
On an individual case, and if you're somebody has that kind of position of power, might you be able to influence people underneath you?
Yeah, but he's not the head of their antiquities department anymore. He's been replaced.
No, I know. Yeah. I'm just using him because everybody kind of still knows what his name is, but.
Who is he for the audience and for Brian Goodell, who secretly does not know?
He was the head of antiquities of Egypt, Egyptology. Right. Like he's the guy who held the whole mantle. He was the guy. You couldn't do anything in Egyptology without going through him.
What did he hide, or what did he suppress?
Well, we all know that he suppressed the great library that's hidden somewhere under the Sphinx. That's one of them.
Oh, okay.
Well,
just those kinds of things.
There is some evidence that his education was paid for by the Edgar Cayce Foundation here in the United States. So he was very much pushing for putting the capstone, the illuminated capstone, on top of the Great Pyramid of Giza on New Year's Eve of 1999 to bring in the new.
Wow.
Yeah, but the Muslim Brotherhood raised a fuss about that, so that didn't happen. So, but the good questions, I think, or the point we need to I think bring up a little bit, because there are some nuggets to take away from this series. Doug, as you say, the enemy of my enemy, he's raising questions that mainstream history doesn't really have an answer for. So what nuggets do we take, and then how do we process them as Christians?
One of my favorite things that he has popularized, and he gets this from some serious work like Hamlet's Mill that came out in the 60s, book by a guy named Giorgio de Santillana, yeah, and a guy named Mahertha von Deschend, and it's talking about procession of the equinoxes, and he goes into that at least, not procession of the equinoxes, but just procession of the, what would you call it, the Earth,
the pole,
the 26,000 year cycle thing.
Yeah,
like he's popularized that, and also along with his sidekick, it's been on Rogan with him, Randall Carlson, done some really good work on this, and I think that he does an interesting job showing how procession could be involved in the different stages of construction of these different temples, like on Malta. He brings that up. Well, this is something that I've done a little bit of work with Revelation. You find it in probably Genesis. So I think the biblical writers were aware of this worldview. I know that the church fathers were aware of the worldview. I think that the whole idea of Christians being called little fishes, age of Pisces, Jesus ushering this in, this is all stuff that Origen said was, just kind of a common theorem that everybody understood in those days. Well, we've totally forgotten this. And you can take it in a pagan way, like a lot of these guys will. But if God's the one who made this, and if he works time according to cycles in any kind of a meaningful way, if prophecies in any way tied to this, those are all ifs. But if they are, it's something that is being brought back into the modern consciousness, and this show hits it the nail on the head as far as doing that. I think that that's something that's good, important for us to be thinking about as Christians.
Yeah. I was really grateful just to that the whole episode on Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe, just because that is, it's just the information that just people need to be aware of. It's so fascinating, and there's so much hope. Although it's interesting, I think he mentioned this, but it has heavy implications on his speculation, which is when you understand that only 5% of Göbekli Tepe has been excavated. It's like 90. So much. What that means is, which is why archaeologists, the good ones, are very qualified and very careful not to make conclusions, because as you go deeper and earlier, you find things are not. You've got to wait till you have the data before you can really start making connections, and it's too early to really make, I think, such dramatic conclusions based on 5% of the actual, site.
Massive collection of sites. It's 300 square meters plus. There are lifetimes of work. God willing, and the creek don't rise, there's lifetimes of work left to be done at Göbekli Tepe, and who knows what's waiting beneath the soil. And you're right to point out, Brian, archaeology is a processual study. It is a slow, painstaking study. And the reason that we're so careful is not because it's dangerous to, default immediately to some sort of hermeneutic, because there's danger in doing that. But archaeology, this is something that we constantly need to be reminded of. Although there is a restorative aspect of archaeology controlled destruction. That's why such exacting records are kept and such fine testing is done for each 10 centimeter stratum that's uncovered. So it takes time, not to be cliche about it, but it literally takes time to even formulate the theories about a particular site. If you're starting off with something like Göbekli Tepe, that just, as I used to tell my students, it's the paradigm that shatters the paradigm. So our caution is well warranted. and should be more largely embraced. But it is very exciting, and people need to be. I think these are things that people need to be thinking about because they have implications for all of humanity.
What's really fascinating is that just a year ago, September, the archaeologists working for the Turkish government announced that they'd found like 11 more hills in the vicinity of Göbekli Tepe. We've got 12 of these hills now, all of them with those T-shaped pillars.
Crazy.
And yeah, again, they've only excavated a small percentage of what's under the soil there, so we don't know. But I think that's a good point, Judd. The paradigm that shatters the paradigm. We as Christians can look at this and say, if you've got a biblical worldview, this all kind of makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, flood resets everything. Where have we read that before? Anyone? Bueller?
Yeah.
Bueller? So it does get us into the conversation, even though Graham Hancock didn't address it. He didn't go there. He won't go there.
No.
Well, see, it's the opposite. It's what I said earlier. In reversing the story of the Watchers and having them after the flood, you've subverted the biblical world, right? And so I kind of think he might be doing the same thing with the serpent. So serpentine imagery that he brings out, he's brought this out in Hell's work, which is so great. But he takes it in a purely naturalistic direction of a comet that came to the earth. Well, I don't have a problem with that. Yeah. But what if there's something else going on there as well? I don't know, Watchers, Leviathan, Satan, dragon, the whole mythology of the world that he wants to talk about it. And then when it doesn't suit his purposes, he doesn't want to talk about it. I find that really interesting. So as Christians, we can take what his basic work is, and we can wrap it into a Christian framework. And it's there's a lot going on there that is overlapping with what he's doing. But as somebody who's not a believer, he's spinning it the exact opposite way that I would.
If I wanted to read my first Graham Hancock book, which one would you recommend?
Probably Fingerprints of the Gods. Yeah, just because it
still holds up.
Starting work. Yeah, to some degree, I think. Yeah, it does. His follow up to that was a book called Heaven's Mirror, which is a bunch of. It's a great book. It's a lot of pictures that his wife took of all these places that he went, and that's got a lot of processional stuff in it too. That's actually probably my favorite of all his books. But
and there's an updated version. I think it's the second or third edition. So
yeah.
He has updated stuff. Yeah.
What's the Magicians of the Gods about? Literally just the sorcerers and magi and stuff?
Yeah, I haven't read too much of that, but that's kind of his follow-up to the ayahuasca trip that he took with his... I forget what the name of that book is, but that's the book where he's starting to blend these two different ideas into one.
That's the irony of all this.
Yeah.
That they will set aside the Bible and just not even go there. So no, these Christians are crazy. They're it's magical thinking. But we want to tell you about DMT so you can open yourself up and go into the spirit realm and talk to these entities that these Christians that they don't exist, but they do exist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing. It's just an amazing thing to watch it from afar, eating your popcorn while you do it.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like he has a universal sinful nature that seeks to justify rebellion against God.
I am shocked to find gambling going on in here.
Horrified.
It's, yeah. Well, I think this is why it's important to have a conversation like this and to do more work in these areas because, I mean, none of us get an 8-part Netflix series, and there are a lot of people out there who are being drawn into this worldview by a very appealing. Hancock does a good job as a presenter. He comes across as very rational, very reasonable, very measured. And even when he's outside the Serpent Mound Park saying, well, they've barred me, they won't let me in, he doesn't really come across as angry. He's just saying, isn't this kind of silly that they won't let a discussion take place? That's going to appeal to a lot of people.
Sure it is.
I mean, one of the reasons I stopped hosting debates on this, I've only done it a couple of times, hosted debates on this podcast, is because usually it's, you got two groups of people who just want to see their champion smash the other guy. It doesn't really solve anything. And sadly, for those people who are on the fence, it's often the guy who comes across as friendliest, regardless of the information, who wins the argument. I saw that happen in a theological debate where the friendlier guy was really, but the other guy was just so.
Are you implying me?
No. It was not you.
I know, because I ain't friendly.
But it was, this is the danger, I think, of Graham Hancock and things like it. They come across as so friendly and open, and we're presenting information that the world wants to keep from you because this is keeping you from understanding your true destiny. Hey, you are God. He doesn't go there in this series. I mean, that's right. That's reserved for the stuff on Gaia TV. That's where it leads. Right. And all these programs that we were watching on Gaia TV, where he was one of the guests, a group of rotating experts talking about various things, that's always where it leads. We've forgotten that we are divine, and we need to rediscover that divine spark because we're all part of one big divine body. It's like, if we're all cells in the same organism, why is it we're fighting each other and hurting each other? What, autoimmune disorder within the body? I don't know.
But of course, if it is an autoimmune disorder, then that assumes there is something that is a disease, and we are the ones to root it out.
Yeah. Well, that's why we do what we do here on Iron and Myth. I would recommend people watch it. I'm going to go around the room here and just see what you think. I would recommend people watch it, but just keep a biblical worldview in mind and just ask, okay, what is he leaving out of this puzzle? What if the biblical narrative and the intervention of these supernatural entities called angels actually played a role in this story? How would his conclusions be different? That's what I would suggest. Brian, what did you think? Yeah,
same thing. I definitely watch it. It's enjoyable. It's entertaining. It's interesting, but be sure to watch something that opposes it. Like I'll give you the link to the that woman who analyzes each episode. She's not a hard fighter. She's just an intellectual scientist type. And so just always listen to the other side, because think about it, in today's world, people don't do a lot of research. They get exposed to one thing and it seems so powerful and impactful. And I admit, watching it, I felt that too. But then when you read the other side or listen to the other side, but you gotta put some effort into finding opposing viewpoint and check it out.
Okay. Doug, what your thoughts?
I think Brian's point about propaganda at the beginning is really, really important. And I like, Brian, that you said that propaganda doesn't have to be evil. In fact, sometimes good propaganda is necessary to counter bad propaganda. Yeah. But it is propaganda. It's coming from one point of view, and you have to read it. You have to watch it and read his stuff with that in mind. However, this is walking the tightrope, and we have to do two things simultaneously. You have to be aware of that, but at the same time, you have to be fair to what he's saying. You have to understand what he's saying. You have to not react knee-jerk against him and just start astroturfing everything that he says.
Yeah.
If you've never come across this stuff before, he's asking really, really good questions, and he's got some fairly good answers, I think, and some of his conclusions I think are off, but listen to what the guy is saying and try and understand what he's saying and realize that it's one point of view and that other people have another point of view. That's how we learn, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Judd, your conclusions.
I would recommend the series to people. I just echoing what Brian and Doug said, that, it's, at the very least, it's prudent to watch this through the lens of the Bible generally, and specifically, I would say through the Divine Council worldview, because that will make a lot of this stuff make sense, I think, from the biblical perspective. And again, I would echo Doug. I think the right questions, he's asking a lot of the right questions. In that regard, I've always had a degree of respect for Graham Hancock. But like Brian pointed out, we come to a point in our civilization today where someone with an opposing viewpoint is immediately your enemy. And we've forgotten how to, and this is across the board. This isn't just in intellectual circles. We've forgotten how to enter a civil discourse and garner what good we can from an opposing viewpoint. And we don't have to walk away from that being enemies. I don't agree with everything that Graham Hancock writes or publishes or all any of it. I don't agree with all of his conclusions. But that doesn't mean that I can't, that his work can't help me formulate and perhaps even answer some research questions that I have. And so that's an important thing, I think, for Christian people in general, but Christians as well, as they're watching this, kind of take all of this into account and see what's biblically relevant. What's biblically relevant. What can we do with what's being proposed here in terms of a timeline, and is some of that congruent with the biblical timeline, particularly the Genesis material?
So, a destruction of by cataclysmic event of a global civilization around 10,000 BC. Yeah, that might have some parallels in the Genesis narrative. Brian Godawa, Pastor Doug Van Dorn, Dr. Judd Burton, fascinating discussion as always, and we look forward to next month's Iron and Myth. Check the show notes below wherever you're watching or listening to this program for the web links to the websites for Doug Van Dorn, Brian Godawa, Dr. Judd Burton, and they'll be back again next month as the Iron and Myth series continues. Coming up, a new feature on this program that I am calling Bless Their Pointy Little Heads. That's straight ahead on A View from the Bunker. Prepare for spiritual war by arming yourself with information. Take advantage of these specials through March that dig deep into the Bible to help you make sense of the chaos around us. First, our Veneration Bundle, our 2 co-authored books plus the travelogue DVDs from our Israel tours. An $85 value, just $45 plus shipping and handling. The Second Coming of Saturn Bundle, featuring my book and the 13-part companion DVD, a $50 value for just $35 plus shipping and handling. The This Is War special offer, featuring the Second Coming of Saturn, 4 DVDs, and 7 hours of audio interviews with Bible scholar Dr. Michael Heiser, a $145 value for just $75 plus shipping and handling. And the Gilbert Fiction Collection, all 8 novels in Sharon's Red Wing Saga series plus my 2 novels, a $200 value for just $140 plus shipping and handling. These offers are available through March only at our online store, gilberthouse.org/store. And again, we thank you for your prayers and support. Driving the internet to think. That is our mission. Coming to you from the heartland of America, the beautiful Missouri Ozarks. This is A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. You'll find us online at VFTB.net. Social media on Twitter at View from Bunker. My personal Twitter account at Derek Gilbert, Facebook View from the Bunker, and the new social media sites, Truth Social, Get Me, We Get Her Parlor, at Derek P. Gilbert. Well, going to launch a new feature this week. Just trying to find something to fill the last few minutes of the program here, and hopefully my evil plan to try to convince you to watch through the promo to find out what I'm going to talk about on the other side. Yes, I know it's evil, but now I've confessed, so I'll ask forgiveness. A weekly featured story that just kind of makes you go, oh. Which, at least tentatively, we're going to title Bless Their Pointy Little Heads, because I don't want this to be mean-spirited. That's not really what the gospel calls us to do. Actually, we're called to the opposite. We are to love our enemies and to share the hope that we have in Jesus Christ with gentleness and respect. But sometimes you got to call stuff out for what it is. And sometimes the stuff that you're calling out is just makes you go. So this week, I want to bring you the story of the Mary Poppins of disinformation, Nina Jankowicz, who was hired about a year ago to run the Ministry of Truth. This is the Disinformation Governance Board, but more commonly known as the Ministry of Truth by the Biden administration. Department of Homeland Security had hired this young lady who was allegedly a disinformation expert. She knows the difference between good information and misinformation and malinformation. So she was apparently determined to be the best candidate to run this department inside the Department of Homeland Security. Think about this now. In a nation where the First Amendment, the very first modification to the Constitution of the United States, guarantees Americans the freedom of speech. Now, the limits, of course, are that you can't go into a crowded theater and shout fire or something that'll get people hurt. Okay, there are some limits. But aside from that, misinformation, disinformation sometimes means you're just saying things that those in power don't want to hear. We've seen that a lot over the last few years. We've had a few videos pulled from certain social media channels because of things we said that now turn out to be true, according to the FBI, according to the Department of Energy. It is now okay to blame China for the thing because China's siding with Russia. So now we can blame China for the thing that when we accused them of it 3 years ago on Sci Friday, we got yanked. But I digress. Anyway, Nina Jankowicz was hired, and then when the public, not surprisingly, pushed back against the government, against the announcement that the government had hired a person to set up within the Department of Homeland Security a disinformation governance board. I mean, could you come up with a title that was any more dystopian than that? It was suddenly announced, no, we're going to scrap the whole thing. This not really, okay, we're not doing this. And so now Ms. Jankowicz finds herself out of a job. Now she has gone public. She's setting up a crowdfunding campaign asking for donations so she can file a lawsuit against Fox News for spreading disinformation and misinformation about her. She wants to raise $100,000 so she can file Fox News. Now, here's the thing. She's mounting a lawfare campaign against Fox for simply reporting on what the Department of Homeland Security had announced and pointing out that Ms. Jankowicz had been spreading disinformation herself about things like the Hunter Biden laptop, which now we also know, thanks to corporate media, New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, CBS News, all admitting, oh yeah, that thing we said was fake news back in October of 2020. Yeah, it's real. Anyway, she's going to sue Fox News. But here's the thing. The fact that she's having to ask for money to do it suggests that perhaps attorneys that she's been in contact with are not willing to take this case pro bono, meaning for free, meaning that they are so sure she's got a case that they would take the case on contingency. They would get the case knowing that they would win and perhaps get paid out of the damages collected. She can't find anyone to do that. She's raising $100,000 and says if she doesn't spend it all, she'll donate it to other women and other marginalized people who have similarly been oppressed like her. Look, Ms. Jankowicz, I know what it's like to be unemployed. I spent years in the radio business, spent 2 of my first 5 wedding anniversaries as a young man standing in line at the unemployment office. So I know what it's like. It's not fun. But maybe don't go public singing about how you're the Mary Poppins of disinformation and insisting that you and like-minded individuals like you have the right to tell other intelligent people, like me and my friends, that we do not have a right to exercise our First Amendment, guaranteed First Amendment rights to speak freely in this nation. Just a suggestion from somebody who's been around for a little while. Skywatch TV's got a virtual conference coming up. That is just being announced today as you're watching this. The spring virtual conference, you'll find all the information on the website, defenderconference.com. I've got a presentation in there, and you'll find all of the details, speakers, and so forth, and also an early bird discount. All of that information at defenderconference.com. We'll be traveling to Ohio for the Go Therefore conference in July. This is at Harvest Revival Center. our good friend Dr. Mike Spalding putting this together again, and July 28th through 30th. We will be there. This is the Dayton, Ohio area. Brookline is a suburb of Dayton, and we hope we see you there as well. More information online at gothereforeconference.com. Gothereforeconference.com. Skywatch TV's tour of Turkey. Well, this looks like it's going to be rescheduled. We don't have firm information yet from the tour company in Turkey, but just the devastation in the southern and eastern parts of the country, we sure hope that the infrastructure is rebuilt. It's more important that the people there have places to live, sleep, and eat than they're ready to accommodate tourists. Let's put the cart behind the horse here, and we'll update you on this because we definitely want to go. Judd Burton, Aaron Judkins on board to join us on this tour and show you those sites, including Göbekli Tepe, Karahan Tepe, and others. I don't think we'll get to Karahan Tepe, actually. That's not open to tourists at this point, but some of the artifacts from that site are in the museum at Şanlıurfa. But first things first, rebuild, and then we will take you to those sites. So if you get a spare moment, please leave a review. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Spreaker, Stitcher, wherever fine podcasts are sold. Our announcer is D.C. Good. And A View from the Bunker is a production of Gilbert House Ministries, released under Creative Commons Attribution, not commercial, no derivatives 4.0 international license. We do this because we wrestle not against flesh and blood. I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is A View from the Bunker.